Let's focus on your teachings on the loving kindness practice or the metta practice. And, it seems like such an important practice for our Western culture where, in part it's the human condition and maybe exacerbated by some of the, I think, slightly mistaken religious views of some of wisdom traditions that became dominant in the U.S., that have promoted a lot of self-loathing and self-hatred and so forth in Westerners. And so it seems like this loving kindness practice is really an important place to begin for so many of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true. And as I said, I got acquainted with it the first time at my first retreat, and was very intrigued with it, and which was a good instinct. And yet it was many years before I had a kind of formal situation with a teacher and guidance instructor. And in those years, I learned how you did it, and there are many ways of doing it, but I learned several ways of doing it, and would try to practice on my own, but it wasn't the same as having that kind of guidance. And finally, in 1985, I went to Burma and did this intensive period of loving kindness practice. So, in many ways, I would consider loving kindness the quality of the heart that is wishing well for ourselves, for others, that honors interconnection, that sees interconnection, rather than reifying or solidifying that sense of self and other and us and them. We understand that on the levels in which it works, but we also understand the levels in which it's more about we than about you and me, totally separate. I find that it's actually, in many ways, it's like, it's the secret ingredient in mindfulness practice. In mindfulness practice, you may begin with, say, resting your attention on the feeling of the breath, but you would then move on at some point either to sensation in that way that Goenka taught, or to a more open awareness, seeing what becomes predominant. It's an emotion. It's a different emotion. It's a thought. It's a sensation. Applying the same skill of mindfulness, that kind of balanced awareness, to whatever becomes predominant. And that, for many of us, the secret ingredient really is loving kindness, because it's not easy. I'm somewhat famous, for example, with my first teacher, Goenka, for having marched up to him and saying at one point, I never used to be an angry person before I started meditating, thereby laying blame exactly where I felt it belonged, which is clearly on him. It's clearly his fault. And of course, I had been hugely angry, but I hadn't been in touch with it. So I was 18 years old, never having been in therapy before, looking within. And of course, I was discovering those sort of things, and I was very upset. I wouldn't call that mindfulness, really. It was better than not knowing the anger was there, definitely better. But it wasn't exactly balanced. It wasn't exactly interested. It was horrified. I was horrified. And the missing ingredient was some kind of compassion for myself, some kind of presence that wasn't judging so harshly, all of which is about the loving kindness. And so I could have used it actually as a precursor, as a building block to a better mindfulness. So it exists there, and it exists certainly along with qualities like compassion as the expression of mindfulness. When we see more clearly, we do see interdependence. When we're more balanced and aware, we can see more clearly. One of the things we do see is how connected we all are. However alone we might feel, we are in fact connected. And so out of that connection, it's not, sometimes people think loving kindness is kind of gooey and sentimental and a little awful too, because you just get stupid and you do these stupid things, you're smiling all the time. It's not like that at all. It's an inner state of freedom where we are honoring connection, we're recognizing our lives are connected, and we wish people could come out of suffering. It would be a better world, not only for the people who are distinctly suffering, but even for the people causing suffering. If they were suffering less themselves, then it would be a better world, because they would be causing less for others. And so that doesn't mandate a certain kind of action. It doesn't mean you have to let them move back in, whoever they are. You have to be heard again. You have to give them more money. You have to say yes. You have to smile. It doesn't mean you've got to behave in a certain way. It's an inner state. And how we do behave might depend on discernment and history and understanding. Maybe it's balance, like some compassion for yourself as well as for somebody else. And so it takes a lot to really understand what we mean by loving kindness. And we go through various stages in that exploration through the practice of it.
Mm. Well, it's such an important practice, and really on so many levels. Even if someone's primary interest, at least what they feel their primary interest in meditation is about developing liberating insight or being able to, practice your way into deep samadhi and things like that. And it can really be a cognitive practice until we find a way to soften the heart and come into the body. And so loving kindness really seems to be, there needs to be an internal softening. And that's so important. And then ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
all the great contemplative traditions are about, getting beyond the duality of the limited self. And so loving kindness practice, when we do it both for ourselves and with others, is about, as you were describing, getting to that we and to that more universal dimension. So it's a profoundly deep practice. And of course, in recent years, the need for self-compassion has become so evident. And you have the self-compassion model developed by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, and you have the RAIN practice, and with Tara and others have focused on a lot. It seems that people are just realizing there's a deep need for this. But the classic metta practice, it just seems like such a multidimensional practice that's very necessary within the context. I mean, even if you weren't doing classic metta practice, it seems that for your practice to deepen, you'd have to be bringing some spirit of that into your practice.
I think that's really true. And I've also watched with some kind of amusement how in very recent years, with the popularization of a word like mindfulness, people then looking at the word and say, well, it sounds kind of cold, sounds a little clinical, like I want to be mindful. What does that mean? And so I've heard people propose, let's call it kindfulness. Let's call it, warm mindfulness was one. And of course, it was Ram Dass with loving awareness. Let's call it loving awareness. That's what we should call it. And I think we can call it mindfulness, but we have to hopefully know what it means.
Absolutely. And one of the better known forms of secular mindfulness, of course, John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he developed these attitudinal qualities, I think originally 7, now 9, but I don't know if he uses the term, he doesn't use the term self-compassion, but certainly self-acceptance and openness, curiosity, and fresh beginner's mind, things like this are about that softening into and allowing and really coming home to ourselves at a deeper and deeper level. So and the metta practice has just been a core practice for me for so long, and I feel it brings my practice to the heart. It spiritualizes my practice. It embodies my practice.